all good.
Sometimes in hospitality, you meet personalities where you know immediately there's more to the picture than just what you see on the surface. And you become a little bit fascinated by what drives a person, where they've come from, and how that's then playing out and what they bring to not just the role, but the broader community around them. And Vince Schiller is absolutely one of those people for me. So it's a real privilege to have the chance to sit down with you on More Good Drinks to, I guess, get to know you a little more and try and unprise some of these layers of creativity and thoughtfulness and what's driving you, because you work in hospitality in Auckland, previously at Rocket Man, most recently at Broken Lantern. You really helped spearhead and lead Auckland Cocktail Week, but there's so much more going on, Vince. Tell us who you are and where you come from.
Well, hello. Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. Well, I spent most of my life in the Chicago area. Right around 2021, 2020-ish, I started traveling a bit, and that landed me in New Zealand in 2022. And I thought I'd be here for 6 months, and now it's almost been 4 years. So really, I've started to call this place home, and I've really enjoyed my time here. So, but yeah, like you said, I worked for Allie and Heather over at Caretaker and Deadshot, and then Rocket Man once they opened that place. And, in regards to kind of creativity and being able to explore those things, Rocket Man was a fantastic spot. Just they kind of let me, Allie and Heather really gave me a lot of space to run events and do fun things and explore some creative avenues. Yeah. And then now it's, believe it or not, almost coming up on a year with Broken Lantern. So things move quickly, but it's been good.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're from Chicago, but where are you from? What is it what are the key formational ideas and experiences that have shaped you to who you are? Because, and let me unpack why I think that's a great question, other than I asked it. But you come with this very natural optimism, a very comfortable confidence and assurance that you seem able to just pull things off, but also pull people together in ways that are not necessarily always seen out loud. I think of examples of the hospo nights that you've run, bringing Auckland Cocktail Week together. So I'm interested in understanding some of the ideas or experiences that have shaped that capacity in you.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of you to say. I guess, maybe a bit of background. I have a degree in music. So I studied music composition and was really into that for quite a bit of my life, but ended up, like many people who study music, working in hospitality. As you do, you want to make money. And then, I had tossed up going to grad school and things like that, and it just never worked out. But that kind of like creative bent, I think, has always been part of who I am and what I'm interested in. So I just tend to pick up hobbies that just kind of stick to me. I don't know. So even if it's not music, visual art or gardening or making a maro or whatever, I just tend to love those kinds of things. And I was raised in kind of what I would consider to be a creative home. My father has worked from home pretty much as long as I've been alive, had a shop attached to the house, and he actually made models and props for commercials and print ads and trade shows and things like that. So he is always and has always been a creative person and very much about problem solving and stuff like that. So that's kind of my core background. But yeah, the hospitality thing, it's funny. I didn't embrace it right away. I kind of got into hospitality, and if you have half a head on your shoulders, you often end up getting into management. And so I did hospitality management for a while, and then I did what a lot of people in management do, which is go back to bartending, because in the States that makes a bit more money and it's a little bit easier. And it's, I wanted to explore other things and did a bit of like woodworking and cabinetry work for a while and stuff like that. But it probably wasn't, I would say, until coming to New Zealand that I really more fully embraced hospitality, and maybe kicking and screaming in some ways, but I love it now. So it's become this great avenue for kind of, like you said, for community, for creativity. Yeah. And I really have kind of found a home both in hospitality, but I think specifically in Auckland hospitality.
Well, I mean, you seem relatively bedded down in Auckland hospitality now. I won't labor too long on how hard I tried to hire you to leave.
Oh, true. Yeah.
But was there a tipping point that you identify or can look back on now where hospitality moved from being something that was functional in terms of a money spinner and something that you could turn your hat to
Mhm.
while your attention maybe was more vocationally focused on other things, to actually seeing it as something that is more of the vocational focus?
Yeah. I would say there's a couple of things. Number one, before I came to New Zealand, I spent a little bit of time in Alaska for a summer, and that was casual work. I worked at a brewery, but I also did at the start of the summer about a day per week at this little distillery. And this distillery made gin and vodka, but they had a cocktail menu, which was kind of interesting and fun and seasonal. And it's kind of hard for people to imagine, but the amount of produce and things you can find just out in nature in Alaska is like phenomenal. Even though it's covered in snow half the year, the half that it isn't, it just everything grows.
Abundant, right?
Yeah, yeah. So in my time there, to make a long story short, I would do quite a lot of foraging, and started kind of getting into making shrubs and syrups and things like that, and kind of realized, number one, how rewarding that was to me, the kind of just slow, steady, creative process, and then number two, how that fits into hospitality. So that was kind of a maybe a switch flipping for me, where I was like, oh, actually, I think if I can kind of work out a way to make hospitality this, to focus on this kind of thing, that's really what I love. And then, beyond that, I would say just kind of being inspired by other places. Spent a week in Melbourne that was really, really inspirational. And I think sometimes you need that moment where you look at hospitality from the outside and you enjoy it as a consumer, and then you
Mm,
realize, well, actually, I really like this. This is cool. I
mm.
do this. I like these things about it.
And don't you think that's always a benefit of travel in particular?
Hmm.
Because it's very hard when you work in hospitality, it's actually very hard to switch over and have a genuine hospitality experience if you're anywhere within your own network. I often have to remind other people and myself, our hospitality experiences are not same because
Yeah.
inevitably we might know somebody behind the bar, on the floor, what have you, and that shapes it and colors it.
100%.
But the beauty of travel and when you're in hospitality is you get to have that really fresh and clean experience, and I find that really invigorating.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I think whenever I'm working at a venue, I'm always trying to remember what it was like to walk in there the first time. Because as soon as you've been there 3 or 4 times and you know the lay of the land, everything looks different. Where they put the menus, where they put the water, how you're greeted. You think that's all normal now, and you have to realize, like, okay, what is it like for a consumer to walk in the door? So it's very true
Mm,
that like fresh experience is hard to come by if you've been to a place even once. But
Talk to me a little bit about the role of community building in what you do,
Hmm.
because it's been a consistent theme in all of the roles you've had in
Yeah.
Auckland in particular. And I'd like to talk, it would be so easy. I'll frame this for you.
Hmm.
It would be so easy to lead into these questions and wanting to explore the subject with you through a lens of creativity. But I
Hmm.
want to put that on the back burner first and say,
Sure.
no, let's talk about community building, and community leadership
Yeah.
from your perspective, how the thoughts that shape that for you. And then we can talk about the creativity that then brings it to life in really great ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think community in general is kind of dying for a lot of people, which is really unfortunate. But and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I was just listening to a podcast the other day where they were just talking about how, by the numbers, people who say that they're involved in meaningful communities is getting lower and lower and lower. And so I think that hospitality is that for a lot of people. So when it comes to, doing hospitality events and kind of getting people excited about things and getting people involved, I think that community aspect is what a lot of people come for, even if they don't even know it, even if it's not on the forefront of their brain. I think so building a space where people feel comfortable and where they feel like they can come and meet some friends and that kind of thing, I think is super important. To your question though, specifically, were you asking kind of why I think that's important, or how that's constructed, or what? I think having a meaningful community is part of what it means to be human, right? Living your life in isolation, it's very hard to find meaning, and it's very hard to find belonging. And so I think a lot of people, they just need that space. So I guess one of the things that's maybe a challenge in Auckland or in New Zealand hospitality is that you don't have as many, what I would say maybe are career hospitality workers. A lot of people will do it for a little while and then they go off and they do something else because it's not as maybe not as lucrative a job as it is in other places. But, I think the unfortunate thing there is that then you kind of lose people. So one of the challenges, right, is that maybe people don't stick around as long. But kind of what I would like to see and what I have always wanted to do is kind of show people you can actually do something with this, right? You can actually invest in this. You can not to bring up creativity, but you can find a creative outlet, through hospitality. And so I think that's one of the reasons I think that it's important.
And so over your time, and in particular, I guess I think about hospitality venues have always been the third place, right? They've always been the space outside of your home and outside of work where you can connect and gather, but it feels relaxed enough that you can, create an environment. It's the friend's couch that we grew up watching, or the Cheers bar that our parents probably watched.
Yeah.
And so that idea kind of resonates, and I think it resonates across the board. One of the things I observe you doing is reaching out to be a lot more intentional when it comes to then creating some of those spaces for the hospitality community as a whole.
Yeah.
How intentional has that been? How did you sort of stumble across that, or did it evolve
Well,
organically?
yeah, I would say that none of it was anything that I or anybody else created from the ground up, right? I kind of just knew, okay, there's this thing, and you can tap into it, and kind of a lot of when we were doing hospitality events at Rocket Man, a lot of that was just getting to know people individually, and then making sure I had their information, and then anytime an event would come up, just send them a message and say, hey, come along. And all of a sudden, you start sending a few individual messages, and doing cocktail competitions are a great way to kind of build community because you've now got 8 people competing, right? 8 bartenders. And now you've got all their friends who want to come support them. And all of a sudden it becomes a great way to just get everyone together. So yeah, there was a lot of like kind of that just individual trying to reach out to people. And still to this day, I mean, there's always new faces. So I'm always trying to learn, okay, where are you from? Where do you work? Yeah. How do we get more people involved? I think there's a lot of hospitality in Auckland that still is maybe not part of that community, and I would love to see more of that. I don't want to see hospitality become a kind of a clique with okay,
Hmm.
these bars and it's not these bars, right? I think it's should get everyone involved. But yeah, it kind of evolved organically, and I would say a lot of that was just kind of that maybe grassroots reaching out and getting to know people and such.
I mean, there are a lot of people that I talk to in hospitality these days who are very focused on the customer experience and curating that to a high degree, but
Yep.
they're also really dialed in on the drinks experience. There's a really deliberate, it feels like a deliberate, and I don't know if it's ingrained, if it's a discipline that you've learned, or
Yep.
if it's something that you have simply just practiced over the years. But the way in which you network out and make connections and then stay present to them it just seems to be like a great habit. If you were to
Yeah.
unpack, hey, here's how to make connecting with people or connecting within your own network straightforward, or make it an easy habit, what would you how would you break that down for somebody else?
Yeah, tough question. I don't know that I've thought too much about the kind of the gears of how it works. I will say one of the things that maybe drives me or that I've realized about myself is that I don't particularly care to be in the spotlight or like the person who is featured at a particular event. I mean, sometimes I have to jump in and be the MC or something like that, but I would much rather give other people a platform to lead things and to be creative and to kind of find themselves a little bit. So I think maybe that's one of the things is that when you give people a space to explore themselves and to be creative and to maybe be in the forefront, that can help, create community, that can help get people together. Because I would never want anything to be the Vince show. That's
Hmm.
the point. And especially with, even with Auckland Cocktail Week, that was one of the things that I was like, I want to make sure that we just give everyone as much space as we can to do, fun, interesting things. And even with events that have run at Broken Lantern or even up in ACS, Martin is often the guy making cocktails. And so I'm more than happy for that. It's awesome to work with somebody who knows what they're doing and they're good at it and like get them into that position. So I guess maybe that's the other thing I would say is that finding people's strengths, finding where they fit, where they feel comfortable, the things they want to explore, that can be very important too.
Hmm.
Yeah, there've been quite a few people that I've met kind of throughout my time in hospitality in Auckland who will come into the bar and they'll sit down and they'll chat and we'll just be chatting about things that they're passionate about, things that they're interested in. And what's cool is like oftentimes we're standing in a space where we can make that happen. We don't have to just talk about it. We can be like, okay, let's do an event. Let's figure out how we bring people together for this. So I think that maybe is, a big part of it is just helping people find their space.
You're kind of like a facilitator, but
I hope
also,
so. Yeah, I would hope so.
I mean, kind of what I want to say maybe is like, are you just kind of like everybody's favorite summer camp leader? You know,
I
you're
don't
just
know.
making stuff happen in the background, making it fun, bringing people together, making sure everybody's got a vibe and a space where they can really thrive.
Is that going to be the title of this video? Everyone's favorite summer camp uncle?
I don't know. Well, we can road test that.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I would hope so. I think that's, I like to see people succeed and, see people be able to explore creativity and yeah,
So let's talk about some of those successes in the context of Auckland Cocktail Week. So the
yeah.
premise was let's celebrate Auckland's cocktail culture. Let's
Mm.
give people the opportunity to showcase what's happening at venues. Let's give that a little bit of a consumer focus so that
Uh-huh.
it's about driving people into venue, spending some money, perhaps trying some things they hadn't tried before, but then also a smattering of events that were bringing the community together. Some education, some celebrations, some party. What were some of the success stories? What were some of the fun moments and the things that, was there a moment where you just went, man, when that person flew off the stage or, had that big smile on their face, I knew we'd hit it. We'd hit the mark.
Yeah, well, it's funny when you do anything like this, you do all this planning, and then when the week finally comes along, you're kind of just like, all right, we just got to push the boat out, and we have to see if it works. So I think probably maybe the big moment was just the first night when there were just a bunch of people who showed up. We did this Battle of the Bars thing, and was just really good energy to start the week off, and so that kind of alone was like, okay, at least things seem to be going well. And what I've told people this year for Auckland Cocktail Week was in a lot of ways just kind of a mini version, right? It was a dry run. Let's see if we can do this. Let's see if it works. And nothing went horribly wrong. It all kind of went pretty well. So yeah, I guess highlights. Let's see. What was really interesting to me. So obviously, when a bunch of people show up to an event, that's great. I would say some things had great attendance, some things had okay attendance, but in general, we were quite happy. But what was real interesting to me, we did this ice masterclass with Connor from the Bar Society and Ali from a caretaker hosted over at Goblin. And that actually was one of the better crowds that we had for a masterclass in general. And it was on a Friday afternoon, which was quite funny. I think we initially had thought like, are people going to come out for this? Because hospitality, they work Friday nights, and who knows if they're going to come out. But that had really good reception. So that was a highlight. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but yeah, in general, I would say it definitely felt like, okay, this worked. If there's anything that I maybe was, I don't want to say disappointed about, but what I would like to see different next year is just getting more people involved, and getting more bars involved. Kind of like I said, I think there's loads of hospitality in New Zealand that are maybe not as involved in the community, and I'd love to get more people connected. Finding the space for that might be a difficulty, but I think that's like a good hurdle that we have to overcome.
And there are some themes there, right? I mean, the larger group bars, it's harder to connect with those groups from a participation and kind of an all in. It tends to land much more on the individual hospitality worker. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
there's hotel bars as well, which, and there's, and everywhere else in the world,
Hmm.
everywhere else in the world. Hotel bars is that's where the icons work. That's usually where you're like leveling up.
Yeah,
But in New Zealand, we do seem to have that slight kind of disconnect. And so there is that, there's kind of that, here are the independent bars or the small group bars, and
yeah.
then there's the large groups, and there's the hotel kind of sector. It would be
Well, yeah,
great to bring those people all together.
yeah, and I think for the larger groups and for hotel bars, there's this kind of approval process if they're going to do an event and if they're going to promote. So we did have some hotel bars involved, but I think it's quite difficult for them. So hopefully, if 2027 happens, which I think we'll know in about January, we can maybe give people a little bit more time. But yeah, you're right. I mean, speaking of hotel bars, I mean, there's just so many good ones in Auckland. I would love to do almost just like a feature next time, like a hotel
Hmm.
bar crawl or something like that would be quite fun.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I mean, I think if there's any lessons to take away, or if there's anything we'd like to see maybe happen differently, it's just more people involved, more events, more bars, more consumer engagement too. I think it's kind of
Mm.
hard to draw a ton of attention for something when you only have so much time to promote it. But now that we've done it once, it's kind of like, okay, we've maybe proven to more of the publications and more of the people out there that this is a real thing.
Well, and the great pieces, you've got visual storytelling from this year.
Mhm.
I particularly loved the Battle of the Bars. I
Yeah.
thought that was a really fun way to kick it off. So now is a good time. Let's talk about the creativity because it oozes out. I mean, I have been at events with things hanging from the ceiling, with the most ridiculous bartender obstacle courses that have ever been created by anyone. And so how does that factor in? Because that's probably the part that makes me think summer camp.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
how much wacky fun can we throw into this? And there is a theory. There's a theory around community building. There's a theory around just general well-being that is about the importance of play. And so when I think about your creativity, it's play. You're helping people to play together.
Yeah.
You know, is that you like nodded your finger? So I'm like, oh, have I cracked
I
into
love
something that's true?
Yeah, I love that you said that. So there's a couple of things that I think, but I had a quote written down. I was listening to a podcast with, it was an interview with Brian Eno recently.
Hmm.
He said, play is how children learn and art is how adults play. And I love that quote. And that's kind of exactly, I think, part of my philosophy, part of what we're doing, right, is imbuing events, imbuing whether it's an event or it's just a cocktail menu or an experience, just imbuing it with a sense of imagination and a sense of kind of childlike wonder.
Hmm.
There's a nostalgia factor, but then there's also just this creativity factor, and I think that really draws people in. And I think it's so important because it's just number one, it's kind of what makes humans human, right? Creativity is just a really unique thing that we have, and I think exploring that is really kind of touches home with a lot of people. But number two, it is a way to learn, right? Like children when they're playing, they're playing with their toys or whatever. We don't tell them to stop because as adults we realize they're learning about themselves, they're learning about the world around them, they're understanding how things interact, even if they're just pretending. And as adults, we don't do that so much anymore, but it's still in some ways just as important. So, that Brian Eno quote saying that play is how children learn and art is how adults play. What he's talking about there is that art and creativity are how we as adults also explore our world. It's how we learn about ourselves. It's about how we understand what do we like? What do we want?
Mm.
I don't think we think about these things enough sometimes. So, understanding what is it about this that strikes me, that really makes me excited, that makes me interested.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think that creativity aspect is super important. But what else I would say, creativity for creativity's sake, I think is one of the things that really makes life beautiful. It makes life interesting. But yeah, creativity for creativity's sake, I think is really cool. When you see it, you know it. And I wanted to bring up jerry mapping. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but
And this is the map of the fictional world. This is like Tolkien maps, but on the extreme. Is
well,
that what we're on?
it's specifically this guy named Jerry Gretzinger, and he has spent something like 40 years creating a fictional map, and he makes this map on like A4 size pieces of paper, so it's all kind of cut up into pieces. And he's an architect, and he studied art. He teaches at the University of Michigan. But I kind of ran across him recently because they assembled this map for the first time in like 20 years, because it's about the size of maybe a basketball court, just absolutely huge. But every day, this guy Jerry goes and he goes into his little room and he creates a piece of the map. He works on the map, and he doesn't just create the map, right? He's got the map, and then he will maybe layer over something he's already done. And so when you see the whole thing assembled, it's just this outpouring of creativity, just for creativity's sake. There's no reason
Hmm.
making a fictional map of some place, but as humans, you see that and it just strikes you as, oh my God, how cool is that? And I think that's the kind of thing that I want to be thinking about when we're doing events, when we're designing a cocktail menu, but also designing a space for people to come, both in hospitality, both as hospitality workers and as consumers. Because I think for hospitality workers, showing people you have this avenue to create and to share your creativity with other people, and other people will recognize that. That's kind of one of the things that is most exciting about hospitality, at least to me. But I think that relates to a lot of people. But from the consumer angle, kind of like we were talking about, the importance of play, the importance of imagination. When people come out for a cocktail, they come to a bar or a restaurant, there's a bit of escapism going on there. There's a bit of they want to experience something else. And I think sometimes people think escapism is maybe a bad thing in quantities that are too high, probably. But I think escapism can be very, very powerful as well, right? Stepping out of your own skin for a moment, kind of taking a look at the world from a different lens, from a different angle. It teach you things about yourself. And like I said, kind of tells you a bit about what is it that I want? What is it that I like? What is it that I find interesting? So, in thinking about how do we make bars and events and menus that are rewarding and interesting and fun for consumers, I think this is a big element there. Just thinking about how do we make this playful? How do we make this imaginative? How do we get people
Hmm.
to think about things a little bit differently?
I
Because
I
go on.
have this menu from a bar that's unfortunately no longer open in Dunedin, but it was based entirely around the idea of Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. And
Oh, nice.
so the narrative and the drink selection and the information that's in there. And there are others. I've played Monopoly on a
Mm,
drinks menu before,
I
right?
love.
Which is the perfect opportunity to go with one friend or a group of friends. Some of those experiences that stand out to me, a hotel bar in Edinburgh, where knowing that they are primarily a bar of business travelers because of where they are, but wanting to deliver a great experience, their whole menu is a series of rewritten fairy tales and Aesop's fables, but each one pertinent to the drink, and the drink makes an
Yeah,
appearance. Two things that are great about that: you sit down at the bar, you have a look at the menu, you decide what it is that you want to drink, but you've also got a book to read. Like there's
yeah,
this great interaction that you can have, whether you're a solo traveler or otherwise. And there are so many examples like that. I
yeah,
think even of like Clipper's Passport, where just that moment of playfulness and something that drags me in,
yeah,
or makes it easy for me to escape out. Because
yeah. I
one
think
of the challenges, I think, in unlocking creativity for people who work in hospitality, the assumption is that we're being creative all the time, but actually, frequently, you're working with the same back bar of ingredients, and when creativity crosses over into work,
mm,
the bridge to cross to get back over into creativity being play can sometimes be challenging, at
yeah.
least in my experience. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it can become kind of stale for a lot of people. And I think, in some ways the cocktail menu as it is has become stale for a lot of people. Like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to do, 10 drinks and I'm going to have some riffs on a classic and all this kind of stuff. And, to me, I'm not, I don't consider myself so much of like a cocktail creator as much as I am interested in creating environments for cocktails.
Mhm.
I think that that's kind of one of the ways that we can start to look at that experience from a different angle and imbue a little bit more creativity. Because when you start to think about, okay, well, how is this cocktail going to be served? What kind of glasses is it going to come in? But also, what is it going to look like? And how does somebody get to it on the menu? Is it just written down or is there some other way? You start to think about those angles, and all of a sudden, all these possibilities open up. And so, yeah, I think that kind of the traditional cocktail menu for a lot of people has become quite stale. So to me, that's kind of where a lot of the creativity comes from. But yeah, I think I have, speaking of storybooks, I think I have this was the Choose Your Own Adventure menu that we did during cocktail week. But yeah, just, writing a whole book with 10 different endings and each ending was a cocktail, like that kind of thing. I think is just so fun for the consumer, hopefully fun for the people working as well. But thinking about, like you said, kind of creating a bit of mythology or fantasy or something interesting to go along with the cocktails, it goes a long way.
There's a parallelism, right? Because one of the things that consumer data is telling us right now is that people are, when it comes to their like high street spend or their retail spend,
Hmm.
they're much more driven by fun and by playfulness and
Mm,
by bold kind of, hey, this is lighthearted, as opposed to where we were sort of 5 years ago, 6 and 7 years ago, where it was very serious, it was very
yeah,
craft driven, very intentional. And so it makes sense that in our hospitality experiences, we play into those same consumer desires. The consumer desires don't change. They don't go, oh well, this is what I wanted when I was down at my local liquor store. But
yeah,
now that I'm going out to a serious bar, darling, now I only want to be serious.
yeah.
And I think that applies to so many things. The wine list, the way we even just approach service, making it playful. What's top of mind for you right now when you think about the next expression of creativity that you're looking for, that next kind of playfulness?
Mm. Well, I would say to me at this point, I've luckily had the space to kind of test out a bunch of different ideas and try different things. So to me, kind of the next step forward is, number one, how do we make sure we're adding value for the consumer? Because I think the other thing that consumers are thinking about is, it's not worth it for me to go out and pay $25 for a cocktail. What am I getting for that? You know? But if we give them an
When I could sit at
experience.
home and drink a Pals and watch Netflix.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But if you go, oh, there's this bar out there and they've got this crazy menu where, you have to roll some dice and then you get a cocktail. Now all of a sudden we've created value for the consumer where they go, oh, let me grab some friends. We should check this out. Or like I think I was telling you before we hit record, just doing some movie themed cocktail classes. All of a sudden people are like, oh, well, this kind of sense of nostalgia and playfulness kind of gets built into what what they're getting. So yeah, number one, building value for consumers, and then number two, I think you can get too creative and you can kind of lose the plot. And so for me, it's kind of figuring out, okay, if we're going to do something creative, how do we make sure that it's communicated well and that it's executed well and it comes across to the consumer well? So those are kind of the things that I think about in terms of next steps and creativity and things like that.
Is there anything that you're having to do to help, translate or bring this to life with your team? Because we've talked about creativity, playfulness, we've talked about bringing people together.
Mm.
One of the other traits that seems really strong looking from the outside in is that you're a team leader by
Mm.
nature. It seems like you're able to step up and help facilitate things for people. So
Yeah.
when we talk about these concepts and putting them into play, whether it's Auckland Cocktail Week or at the venue, I mean, and when I think about Broken Lantern, really it's almost like it's like a tavern. It's got like 4 different spaces that you could curate at any given time:
Yeah.
courtyard, main
Yeah.
downstairs, ACS, the private room, it's all kind of going on. Are there tools or things that you've seen work in helping to keep this playfulness, this sense of creativity, and that we're trying to have fun with our guests, but also with each other and with our hospitality work, that have helped get that across to the team?
Mhm. Yeah,
Maybe I should ask the team.
yeah, yeah. That would be a good question. What would I say? I think one of the difficulties of hospitality for a lot of people is that you go into work and it's busy and you have to do what you normally do and you have to have all your ducks in a row, and then in all of that, in your whole work week, by the end of the week, it's Sunday or it's Monday for you, and you're tired and you don't want to think about work. And then on Wednesday or something, you go back and you do it all again. And it's very difficult to be thinking about creativity in that environment, right? If you're just doing the job every day and you don't have the time or the space to do it. So I think I'm lucky to be able to maybe have some dedicated time to think about these things. Not that I don't also think about them on my days off, but I don't expect that of other people, I suppose. But I'm lucky to have kind of the dedicated time to do it. And I think for a lot of our team, they don't necessarily have the dedicated time to do that. So I think the best way to kind of get them creative or get them involved is to pull them in on events and things like that and kind of, maybe delegate, I suppose. There's definitely people on our team who I think are creative and know how to kind of build a playful, fun space. So like when we were doing Auckland Cocktail Week events, there were a lot of people where I knew I could just trust them with, okay, we're doing this over here, and I need you to decorate the space and kind of make it feel a certain way. And so they work on that, or we need cocktails for this, and this is what the menu is going to look like, but I need you to work on the cocktails, and so they'll work on the cocktails. But that's a good question, and I have to say it's something I'll be thinking about more, I think, after this interview, because it is difficult to give people that space to be creative, and I hope that some of the events that we do, especially if they're hospitality related events, give people that space to express themselves a little bit. But I think being more intentional about that is worthwhile.
You qualified in music. And so you're probably in a great position to reframe, I imagine. To reframe, a lot of people, creativity is kind of a big, broad term
Yeah.
that gets applied to people in very binary ways,
Mhm.
often from the time we're very young. Oh, they're a creative kid,
Mm.
or, oh, they're creative, oh, you're creative, or I'm not creative, I'm
Yeah.
what have you.
Yeah.
I'm sure, certainly my experience has been, is that if you carry around one of those labels, creative, it doesn't really mean anything, because as soon as you start to work in the field of creativity, or as I would say, practice the field of creativity,
Yeah.
you very much realize that being creative is less about being talented, which is how we often substitute it.
Mhm.
Being creative is so often about the practice. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter whether you are you're vocationally writing or making or producing, there is the creativity part is the practice part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anybody can be creative because anybody can begin to apply some of these principles of creativity. What advice would you have for somebody who is either feeling a little disconnected from creativity in themselves,
Yeah.
whether that's work, whether that's play at home? What advice would you have, even if somebody's never really thought about themselves as being a creative person, but is tempted to start thinking about playfulness?
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that. I mean, I think that kind of broad strokes thing, both in labeling people as creative or not creative, but also it's just the kind of like intimidation of what does it mean to be creative? It steers a lot of people away. But I think to me, the key thing for creativity is that you need boundaries, and that limitations actually give you more creativity. So I realized this. I always think of this moment when I was a child. McDonald's, would give away toys with the Happy Meal. And at one point they were giving away miniature Lego sets. And as a kid, I was a big fan of Lego sets and things like that. And we had thousands and thousands at home. But if I was in the car and I had gotten one of these little Lego sets with 10 pieces or so, that's all I had to work with. But I would still sit there and, in the back of the car, just create something and then take it apart and create something else. And I realized that limitation of, well, I only have this number of pieces to work with, actually gave me more creativity. Because sometimes I think when you can do anything, then your brain just goes, this is too much. I can't do anything. I don't know what to do with this. So giving yourself limitations and starting small, I think is the real key with creativity. So, find one thing and think, okay, well, how can I be creative about this? And yeah, I love the idea of limitations. And not to talk about this random Jerry guy again, but he actually uses a deck of cards that he's created to tell him what to work on his map every day. And so he's forced limitations upon himself so that he can be creative. And so I think forcing limitations upon yourself, and don't try to do everything at once. Just pick a small thing and just say, I'm going to be creative with this one thing. That's how you actually start to get to the real meat and potatoes of creativity.
Love it. The question I ask almost everybody, your last drink and your slogan, when you come to the end of days,
Yeah.
what do you hope people are going to say your byline was? Vince Schiller, and what's the last drink?
Is the last drink question, is this the last thing that I drank, or is this the last drink before
It's
I
like,
die?
well, it could be either. I
Okay.
mean, so it could be last drink of the day, you're staffy when you finished up a
Yeah.
shift.
Yeah.
The last drink the drink you hope you're still making and enjoying 10 years from now. It
Yeah.
could be the last drink before you die.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I went over to the Halligan the other day, and
Mhm.
couple of friends of mine have just opened that bar. Had a really nice drink there. That was kind of like the last cocktail that I've had recently. That was really wonderful. So go check it out. Go say hi. Unabashedly, I think the last thing that I drank was a Modelo, and it was wonderful. So there's nothing wrong with cheap beer. But yeah, slogan. That's tough. I tend to not enjoy trying to talk about myself in such specific ways, but I guess I would want people to say he was creative, he had fun with things, he enjoyed what he did, and that was contagious. Hopefully,
Yeah, nice.
I think that would
You
be,
took people you took people with you.
yeah, hopefully, yeah,
It's been such a treat, Vince. Thanks so much.
yes. Same to you. Thanks for having me on.
More good.